I was born July 24th, 1938, and I turned 84 July 24th this year. And I thank God for that. And I was born in Salis, Mississippi, and that's the borderline of Durant, Mississippi. And Durant was considered the dark shadow or the dark corner of Mississippi. And it had all of the remnants of the slavery and the plantations. And my family was not immune to that. They were sharecroppers, and so you went from one form of slavery to another form of slavery, because to the land they were bound, they were still on the plantation. And I was born by a single mom, and my grandfather was the pivotal person in my life, and I have memories of being in the cotton field with him. Being at the end of the row, he'd tell me, "Baby, I'm going to go down and I'll come back, and you sit here." And I would ride on the back of his cotton sack. And someone had taught him the beginnings of reading, and my cousins and I, he would sit at the fireplace or the hearth in those days, and he would put the letters in the ashes for us and the numbers. And so that was our first exposure to learning, and with the Bible verses he remembered he would teach to us. I learned early about racism. My grandfather and my uncles could never look the owners, the plantation owners, in the eyes, and I couldn't understand that. And that was considered insulting and out of place. And I never will forget, I must have been about 8 years old, where the plantation owner was reprimanding my grandfather and my uncle, and they were not able to respond. And I didn't understand that until later, and so forth. And so that's the early beginning of my life. And I remember we didn't have wooden floors. It was a lot of dirt, as I remember, and us having corn husk tied together, and it was our task to sweep the floor every day. And I remember going to school and walking every to and from school, and we'd have our buckets with our lunch in. And the books were the old ones that I know now, and I learned later, were from the schools with the white students. They didn't use anymore, and we had those books. So that was my early beginning. Have courage and support from those around me. My mother died when I was 15 years old. So I lived with my uncle and aunt, and I had the ingrained knowledge that I knew I needed to have some education. And they never encouraged that. But that, I think, from my grandfather's early learning, and then my mother telling me to go to school and so forth. And so I think that was a pivotal point, that after my mom died, I decided that I was going to fulfill that goal of graduating from high school, because she only had 8th grade education. I think I stayed in the African American community because I wanted to be an example and to help. So with neighbors' children, I would have like story time, And when I was married, all of the kids would congregate in my yard, and we would do little art projects, and I would always compliment them on their work at school. And helping parents get involved in their children's education, I think the disparity now is so different that we don't encourage parents and grab them that you are a part of the equation. I think that's what I've tried to offer. You cannot just bring your child to school at the beginning in kindergarten and see them at graduation in high school. You have to be involved the whole time. And whether you are educated or not, that support to a child means a great deal. And so I've tried to impact that in my church life, in my community life, in my activities in the community with parents. I started a program of early learning, and I got the ministers to support with a bus. And so we would bring them to, it was pre-K through grade 3 for a summer experience. And I think those kinds of things. And then I was the director of a federally competitive grant that you know about, Dr. Barbara, called Student Support Services Program. And it was for underprivileged students who were underrepresented in the college campuses. And so I would tell them, I said, you are here not to socialize. You are here to be educated so you will have a better quality of life. And I had as a mantra across the door, my destiny will happen because of me. And I said, this involvement of focus, being focused on what it is you want to do and you want out of life, and that you have respect for yourself and you show that respect for others, and you carry yourself in a way that others value you, okay? And it's not hard or not a sin to ask for help when you need that assistance, because you know, many of our young people, they don't want anybody to know, I don't know this. But the ones who have the ability are the ones who want to use the services all the time. So that was I think, and I went to the community to get them to help parents to apply, because many times parents don't apply for programs like that. I tell them, you need to know your history. And I had a young man come to me, he says, the Italians know where they came from and they can trace their ancestry all the way back. I said, well, you can trace yours all the way back too. I said, you come from a proud history of being an African first and then American second. That I think we have to promote with when they're little. You are an important person. You're for parents, and then letting them understand what that is, what centuries ago were brought to this country, to these shores against their will. And they were the foundational builders of this America as it relates to architecture and culture. We have a culture. And I think once we have that kind of understanding and have them always know that you are important. So you can't choose your family, but you can choose your friends. And I think that helps them understanding that you can't be led by a crowd. You've got to be an independent thinker. And there are good and bad people in all stratas of life, And you will find people who are accepting and people who are not. But in the understanding that it's their loss if they don't want to know about your culture and value you. So that's not a person you would consider a friend. And of course, with the young men, I've always told them, be respectful. If a police officer stops you, you give them that respect. Do not get hostile and belligerent. Do whatever they ask you to do so that you will not ignite anger in them and you become a fatality. The major challenge that I've had to overcome has been a female and a Black woman. And when I talked about that t-shirt, that applied to me. It was not because of my inability or lack of aptitude or intelligence, but I saw many times that I was passed over because of the color of my skin. And it was like I could be number 2, but I couldn't be number 1. And I saw that when I was in school board service. I became the first African-American woman president of the National Council of Urban Boards of Education. And they made a big deal out of that, so no. And I heard one of the white ladies say, "Oh no, she can't do that." And that only instilled in me a greater resolve that I was going to do the very best job I could, and I did. And I held that position for 2 years, and it's a 1-year position. I did the same thing with the New York State School Boards Association. When I became the first African-American woman and the second African-American in its 85-year-old history to be president of that organization. So I say to our young people, when the adage of you have to be better is true, and you know that, Dr. Barbara, and you have to be strong and resilient, and you gain that strength from your community, your faith, your church, all of those people who love you. And I always go back to the poem with Langston Hughes, The Mother to Son. Life for me has not been a crystal stair, but I keep climbing and I keep pushing. And I tell them that is your mantra for your life. You've got to recognize that it's there, but you've got to keep striving and you've got to keep pushing.